Good evening. I'd like to call this meeting of the Representative Town Meeting to order. Today is Monday, March 6th. This is the rescheduled meeting of our February 27th meeting, which was rescheduled to today due to weather. Before I hand it over to your moderator, Seth Morton, I'd like to introduce the 4 newest members of our RTM. Starting with District 5, we have Susan Marks, if you wouldn't mind standing up, Susan, and welcome. And Holly Wang joins us in District 5. In District 3, just caucused in and sworn in the last 15 minutes. I'd like to welcome Ann King, if you wouldn't mind standing, Ann. And last but not least, Bill Dunn in the back there. Welcome, Bill. Okay, with 72 members of our 100-person, oh, I'm sorry, who else do we? Oh, Ralph, did I not? Oh, my goodness. And rejoining us to the RTM, Ralph Oben. Please stand up, Ralph. Thank you very much. My apologies, Ralph. Welcome back. So at the last count, we had 72 members of our 100-person body present, which is a quorum. So I'd like to hand it over to your moderator, Seth Morton.
Welcome, everybody. Here we are, late, but very enthusiastic, I can see tonight. Before I move forward, without objection, I'd like to add an item to the agenda tonight. That's the purchase of the fire truck for $825,000 that got through Board of Selectmen and Board of Finance in time, and without objection, I will add that on, and we'll take it up after the presentation by Tom Hennick. Are there any objections? Thank you. So, without objection also, I'll accept the agenda as amended. Is there any objection to that? Okay. Next, approval of the minutes of the January 23rd meeting. Can I have a motion in favor, please? I got Clara there. Great. A second. There we go. Good. Perfect. Barbara? Are there any corrections, additions, changes? Okay, ready to vote? All those in favor, aye? Aye. Opposed? I don't hear any. If you have an abstention, you can leave them with Krista after the meeting. The first item then next on our agenda is a presentation by Tom Hennick from the state of Connecticut, Freedom of Information Commission. He's the public education officer, and he has his style is very let's say he likes dialogue. Normally, if someone has a question in our body, we have them step to the mic. We will try to avoid doing that tonight so you can have free dialogue. I would suggest that if you have a question or put your hand up and stand up and announce who you are and what district you're from, and then ask the question in a firm voice so everybody can hear. If people can't hear the question, well, let us know. We'll try to adjust, but we'll try to do it so that there's dialogue and so that we don't have to have you come up to the mic every time. So, without further ado, Tom Hennick.
Thank you, Seth. Thank you, Krista. Hello, everybody. So, let's see if we can do this with keep the enthusiasm up. You know, that with freedom of information, it's not always the case, but we'll do the best we can. We do these workshops all over the state. We come out, we talk. The idea is to try to help you, to try to answer your questions, not to burden you, not to make your lives miserable, but to try to make it so that if you run across an issue when it comes to freedom of information, you're better equipped to handle it. You have the tools to work with. It's not meant to be something where you walk away sort of downtrodden. It's supposed to try to help going forward. I always tell people before I start that I am not an attorney. I know there's some in the room, but I hope that, I don't know if that's good news or bad news. I don't know how you feel about that. The reason I share that is that none of this is binding. It's not a binding legal opinion or an order from the commission. I've been doing this for 22 plus years at the FOI Commission. I know what our commission is thinking a lot of times. I've read all the decisions, and I've talked to our attorneys, and I'm not afraid if you ask a question I don't know, I'm not afraid to say I don't know. The idea, again, is to try to broaden your base so that freedom of information comes in something that you do as a matter of course. It's not something you have to worry about, and you could do the jobs that you've been elected or appointed to do. The Freedom of Information Act is the law, first of all, in the state of Connecticut. A lot of people think it's just this really cool idea, but it's actually 48 years old. It was Ella Grasso's brainchild when she ran for governor for the first time. And if you do the math, 48 years ago puts us right smack in the middle of Watergate. So you had a country that was beside itself with turmoil, nearing a constitutional crisis, because a lot of things were being done behind closed doors. Democracy only works if people know what's going on, am I right? People have to be involved, people have to be engaged. So she was in Washington in Congress watching all this go on, and she said, if I run for governor and win, one of the first things I'm going to do is create some sort of an open government law. So as you know, she ran and she won. And one of the first things she did was keep that promise, and she put forward this concept of an open government law. And then she did something that was kind of interesting. She said, this law is so important to our state, I will see to it that this law is approved unanimously by our legislature. Have you ever watched the legislature? Right? Can you imagine guaranteeing a unanimous vote, even a group this big, on anything, without having a conversation? Well, I'm here to tell you, she guaranteed it and she got it. I've actually seen a video of the vote. There wasn't a single no vote in the House, not a single no vote in the Senate. This law passed unanimously. I share that because it's interesting. It shows you how important the law was then and now, but it also brings us back to why we're here to do this, to have these kinds of conversations. Imagine the process of getting every single legislator in the state of Connecticut to vote yes. Every single one. It had to be an incredible amount of negotiation, an incredible amount of back and forth, and maybe a little arm twisting here and there. I like the concept, but I don't like this. So you've got a law that makes perfect sense on the surface. There's a quote that I like to read. James Madison, mid-1700s, a popular government without the popular information or the means of acquiring it is but a prologue to a farce or a tragedy, or perhaps both. A people who mean to be their own governor must arm themselves with the power which knowledge gives. Again, for democracy to work, people need to know what's going on. So that makes pretty much sense to everybody. But then you try to read it. Have any of you tried to read it, even a paragraph of it? Your eyes roll to the back of your head. The wherefores and the whereases, and you're thinking, my intuition says this in open government, but, well, that's because to get to the point where everybody voted yes, they left a lot open to interpretation. So that you look at it and you say, okay, I think I know what to do, but it looks like I got to make a call on this. Is this a record we're going to release? Should we be in executive session? Is this actually a meeting? And who gets to make those decisions? Those of us who are on the front lines. I was on a board in my town for 10 years. I chaired it for 5. I was a member of our Board of Selectmen for 2 years. I filled an unexpired term. So a lot of times when I do these workshops, people say, oh, you don't get it, we're volunteers. Oh, I get it, because I was on the other side too. And you're faced with a situation where, my board had somebody who knew a little bit about the law. You're probably in situations where, you often don't. So that's why discussions like this can be helpful. As Seth said, I want you to ask questions as we go along. Again, to keep it rolling, and I'm also mindful of the fact that you have other work to do tonight. I could give you the 3-hour presentation if you wanted, but I think you might throw me out of town. So you're not going to get that. But stand up, ask your questions as we go, don't be bashful, and also understand that if you don't ask the question tonight and you think about something overnight, we're there to answer questions. You know, Wayne's not in the room right now, but Krista's called with questions. If you have a question, don't hesitate to call. This law is not necessarily easy to understand. So, yeah.
So, you know, I've had this comment before where, oh, if there's
Ed? Thanks.
I've had this before where it's like if there's a number of us, you know, we're in the same place, it's a meeting, or isn't it?
All right.
And so and I think, you know, we're members of my committee, education, are going to a Board of Ed meeting, so we are there to see the meeting. And you can't have a meeting, but if you just said by our very presence, we start talking, it is a meeting. So just how does that?
Well, I haven't gotten there yet, so it seems to me like he's, you know, revving up before I even got there. I'll get to that actually in a couple seconds. The law is about two different things. It's about access to meetings and access to records. But you see freedom of information, and a lot of people think freedom of information. I can walk into an RTM meeting and start asking questions. I could walk into Krista's office and start asking questions. But it's not about free information. It's about access to meetings, access to records. It probably should have been called freedom of access. Freedom of information just sounds better. So if you've ever had a situation where somebody started asking you questions and saying, under freedom of information, I have a right to know. Well, they might have a right to know, but they might have to do a little bit of the work. They might have to go to the meeting where the issue is being discussed or get the records where the issues are contained. So, you know, lesson number one that I always tell people is if someone uses FOI as a means of trying to get you to answer questions, that's not what the law is about. And by the way, if that's ever happened to anybody, I know it's probably happened to you, right? Freedom of information. Think about working at the Freedom of Information Commission. People think that we're the information center for the entire state of Connecticut. They don't get what we do. They don't get that our role is to make sure that people's rights are protected. I spend all day on the phone. People call up and ask questions. People call and ask me for directions. I've had people call up and ask me for tickets, how to get tickets to that night's UConn basketball game. True story. And as far as records, people think that we sit in a giant vault surrounded by every record held by every agency in the state of Connecticut. They call me and ask me for your records. I had an attorney call up a couple weeks ago. She said she was very excited. She found out that her client's accident had taken place in the parking lot owned by the state of Connecticut. Could you please send me the video surveillance from that parking lot, she says. I said, no, we don't have those records. Our role, so anyway, if you're ever in a situation like that, lesson number one, you're not obligated to answer questions. So access to meetings, the gentleman's excited about the meetings provisions. Let me read to you the definition of a meeting in the FOI Act. Meeting means any hearing or other proceeding of a public agency, any convening or assembly of a quorum of a multi-member public agency, and any communication by or to a quorum of a multi-member public agency, whether in person or by means of electronic equipment, to discuss or act upon a matter over which the public agency has supervision, control, jurisdiction, or advisory power. So the short answer, partial answer to your question is, if your group, a quorum of your group, gathers to do its work, it's a meeting. And it needs to follow some steps. It needs to make sure it's properly noticed, that it's open to the public, and that there are minutes of that meeting when the meeting is done. Now, a lot of times, this again sort of leans into the question a little bit. People say, well, we had some really sensitive issues to discuss that we didn't want to talk about in public. Can we do that? Well, there's some paths that boards and commissions can take to exclude the public, but in general, the answer to that question is no. You have to start the process in public. It doesn't mean that you can't talk appropriately behind closed doors, but for the most part, you have to think in terms of having a meeting. Then we get this. Well, we have a 15-member board, so we think that 8 is a quorum. So what if 5 of us form a subcommittee, a formal subcommittee to talk about an issue? Is that subject to FOI? People think that it's not. Surprise, it is. When you look at the definition of a public agency in the state statutes, it's long, I won't read it, but there's a phrase in there that says, including any committee of or created by. So if you create a formal committee, that subcommittee is subject to freedom of information as well. Again, the goal of this law is to make sure that we work in a public setting when we do the work of the people. That's what the concept says. The law gives us 3 different kinds of meetings to work with: a regular meeting, special meeting, and emergency meeting. Regular meeting is a meeting that you have per a schedule that you establish every year. We meet on the first and third Tuesday, the second and fourth Monday. Whatever that schedule is, that's your regular meeting schedule. Now, special meeting, people see that word special and they get worked up. They say, well, wait a minute, special meeting, we can't do this, we can't. You can do anything you need to do at a special meeting. For both of those, you need to prepare an agenda. Do we have any agenda preparers in the room? Several. Agenda preparation needs to be as specific as possible. You want to have as much specificity on there. The courts have told us that the purpose of the agenda is to fairly apprise the public as to what's going to happen. So you want to have enough on there so that somebody can look at it and say, okay, I know what they're going to talk about tonight. But it's particularly important when we look at the difference between the regular and the special meeting. I don't know about you, but when I put together an agenda, I cut and paste. And you have items like other business, old business, new business. That's not the greatest agenda item. But if you're in a regular meeting and you have an item like regular business, like other business or new business, the chairman, the moderator, can say, is there any other business? And you can make a motion and you can second it, and you can add items to the agenda at a regular meeting by a 2/3 vote of those people present. But at a special meeting, you can't add anything. So if you put other business or old business or something like that on an agenda with nothing articulated underneath, you might as well take it off, because you can't say, is there any other business, because you can only talk about what's specific to the agenda. The third kind, otherwise, just by the way, the special meeting can have anything you want on there, just as long as it's on the agenda. The key is, so when you prepare that special meeting agenda, that's where specificity is important. You want to make sure that you have everything you can possibly think of on there. You can always take it off, you just can't add anything. The third kind of meeting, the emergency meeting, folks, is a meeting that I always discourage boards and commissions from using. Emergency meeting is an unnoticed meeting, and it's there for an emergency. The problem is what you and I think might be an emergency might not rise to that level in the eyes of the law. They set the bar really, really high. The best example, sort of the little story that I tell is we have some holidays in Connecticut. Some towns celebrate it, some towns don't. I think of Veterans Day, Columbus Day. We've got Juneteenth coming up. I'll bet this happens then. What happens inevitably after one of those holidays where town hall is closed and it doesn't register because most of us have to go to work. I get a call the next morning. Someone says, hey, Tom, I got a problem. What's the problem? Well, I always make sure the agenda's in at least 24 hours in advance. And by the way, if I didn't say that, remember, 24 hours in advance for the agenda. It's got to be in your office if you have one, and in the clerk's office as well. I always remember to bring it in, but when I went to bring it in yesterday or send it in yesterday, I forgot town hall was closed. So I brought it in this morning. Is that okay? It's not okay. It's not 24 hours. It's a problem. Well, we have too much to do tonight, so I'm going to call tonight an emergency meeting. And my response is, oops, I forgot, it's not an emergency. In our non-legal minds, it sure may feel like one, but it's not. My advice there is always to make sure we think, okay, how can we avoid a problem? Let's call it a special meeting and go 24 hours down the road. People say, well, what is an emergency? And I say, well, it's not, of course, it's not defined the way we would like it, but think in terms of keeping people safe, keeping people out of harm's way, not just somebody forgetting to submit an agenda. Again, avoid it if you can, but if you ever have an emergency situation, the law says you meet, you discuss whatever that situation is, whatever an emergency might be, and within 72 hours you create minutes that reflect what the emergency was, who was there, and what you did about it. Your meetings are open to the public. I stress that as much as I can. Anybody can attend. Hey, you're from Stamford. What are you doing here? That doesn't wash. Anybody could audio or videotape a meeting. That was put in the law 48 years ago. It's not as much an issue anymore because I think everybody's a videographer, right? People with phones and things like that. But here's one that surprises people. Nothing in the FOI Act guarantees anybody the right to speak or participate at a public meeting. A lot of people think that it does. I'll take calls, I wanted to speak about this topic, they wouldn't let me. Not required. Now that sounds counterintuitive, but many boards have public speaking, they have public comment, But for the purposes of freedom of information, just remember that it's not required. So if you've got a situation where you've got a meeting and the room is packed and everybody wants to say something about a particular topic and you're looking out there and you're saying, if we let everybody go on and on all night, we'll never get any work done, you have the right to control that. You have the right to say, you know what, everybody, we're limiting comment to 2 minutes. Or we're not going to talk about topic X. We've talked about that several months in a row. We're not going to talk about it again. Now, this has nothing to do with, political fallout or anything like that. It's on you. But the FOI Act gives you, there's nothing in the Act that covers that, so you can handle that any way you want. Now, do we still have occasional sort of virtual meetings in Darien? Do some of the meetings still done with a virtual platform? So, as you know, this wasn't the case, pre-pandemic in 2020. First, the governor gave us some executive orders, then the legislature jumped in a couple of times. If you have a virtual component to a meeting, there's a couple other steps that you need to take. First of all, the word has to go out at least 48 hours in advance that you're going to have a virtual component to the meeting. Members need to be notified, and the public needs to be notified. For this meeting, 2 days hence, there will be, you use Zoom, Teams, whatever you use, a Zoom link for everybody. Then when the agenda goes out 24 hours in advance, that link has to be on there. It has to be published on a website so that people can click in and attend the meeting virtually if they so choose. Then if it's a regular meeting, and don't ask me why it's only regular meetings, but that's the way they wrote it, you also need to record the meeting, and you need to put the recording on your website within 7 days, and it needs to stay up for at least 45 days. The thing, I don't know about what you found, I've found that the virtual component sometimes has also empowered some people. Do you find sometimes if they're on the screen and not sitting in front of you, they tend to get a little more obstreperous? I know not in Darien, because everybody gets along, right? But in my town, that's what I've found, there's some sort of a shield, they think, that they can be louder and they can be, they can be ruder. Remember that, what I said about public speaking, and you have the right to run an orderly meeting, is my point. So a lot of people think, okay, I'm on the screen, I can say whatever I want, whenever I want. If we were in this room and somebody got loud and you were conducting a meeting, you have a right to toss it or call the cops and get them. You have a right to run your meeting. The same thing, my point is the same thing holds when you have a virtual component. Has a Darien meeting been Zoom bombed? And you know what I'm talking about when I say that? Yeah? Right? Delightful, right? I printed this story out yesterday. Porn Zoom bomb forces cancellation of Fed's event. So the federal government the federal bank was having and the pornography jumped onto the screen in the middle of it. So you're not alone. I dealt with a case out of Bristol a couple months ago. They had the same thing happen. A P&Z meeting, they're looking at site plans for a particular project, and all of a sudden the site plans come down and up comes the pornography. Again, people have a right to attend, but not the right to, disrupt. By the way, that Bristol situation, they got really angry. They put law enforcement on it. It was some kid in Maryland. It had nothing to do with anybody in town. So, you never know where it's going to come from. But when we add that component, we're running the risk of having that happen. You don't have to put up with it, is the bottom line. So, I'm stressing the idea that you meet in public and people have a right to watch you do your work. There are different paths that boards and commissions can take to exclude the public. If I say executive session, does everybody in the room know what I'm talking about? Okay, remember, folks, that an executive session is a portion of a publicly noticed open meeting. It's not something that sits on an island by itself. I'll occasionally get calls from people who will say, hey, we have a meeting tonight. It's an executive session. It's the only item, so we don't have to notice it, right? And the answer is no, it's not right. If you have an executive session item, even if it's the only item on your agenda, you need to convene in public. The agenda needs to indicate what the executive session item is. You need to open up. Someone needs to make a motion to go into executive session. You need to cite one of the 5 specific reasons for executive session. You need to vote to go in. You need a 2/3 vote to do that. You're in executive session. You can talk as long as you want. You can have the discussion, however long you need to have it. But if you're going to take any action at all, you've got to come out of that executive session to vote. You cannot vote behind closed doors. That's one of the cardinal sins. I hate it when I see a board comes out of the minutes say, board came out of executive session and announced that they had, which means they had taken action behind closed doors and they're vulnerable to a complaint. By the way, I keep mentioning these complaints. If people believe they've been denied rights by your public agency, they file complaints with us against the entity. Now, I haven't seen too many against Darien over the years, but everybody, is susceptible to them because you're interpreting the law one way, they're interpreting the law another way. And they might say, you know what, I don't agree with that, I'm going to file a complaint. Somebody mentions something tonight and says, gee, that's not how we do it. We're not running down here with handcuffs tomorrow. We only take action as a commission. Our commission only takes action when somebody files one of those complaints, and then we're obligated to look into it. So it's not like we're always on the lookout for things that are violative of the law. That's not the way we operate. But back to executive session. So there are 5 reasons for executive session. A personnel matter. If you are involved in a personnel matter, there's a couple things to think about. First of all, the agenda and the motion cannot just say executive session personnel. They need to say more than that. Executive session personnel, discussion of the performance of a teacher, discussion of the performance of a police officer, discussion of the performance of a town hall employee. You don't necessarily have to name the person, but you need to have more than just personnel. Then you need to remember that the person who is being discussed needs to be notified. The person has to be told you are going to be talked about in executive session tomorrow night. If that individual then objects and says, no, I do not want an executive session, I want that conversation to be held in a public forum so that everybody can hear it, you cannot go into executive session. That is the individual's rights. Where people get confused on that one is they think, okay, wait a minute, they're going to talk about me in executive session? I definitely have the right to be in the room. So when they let everybody else out, I get to go in, right? No, that's not a guaranteed right. Many, many times the board will invite the individual in to hear his or her side of the story, to use their expertise, to get testimony, something like that, but it's never required. So if you're involved in a personnel executive session, you're welcome to invite the person, in any executive session for that matter. You can invite in whomever you want to give evidence, to hear somebody's side of the story. But the only people who have a legal right to be in an executive session are members of the board in question. So you don't want to invite people in just to watch, because then what you've done is you've created a second audience, you've kicked a bunch of people out, and you've let other people in. You've created an unfair advantage for folks, so you only bring people in who are going to help you, who are going to be a part of that conversation. Executive session number 2, pending claims or pending litigation. It's pretty much what it sounds like. You're going to have a conversation about a pending lawsuit or a CHRO complaint or an FOI complaint. You're going to talk about how you're going to handle it, your strategy, what you're going to do, how you're going to deal with it. You have the right to have that conversation and not, share your strategy with the rest of the world. It also allows you to have a conversation about taking legal action. Let's suppose you've got a situation where you need to take action against somebody. You wouldn't want to tip off that that's what you're going to do, so you could have that conversation behind closed doors. Reason number 3, a security matter. That one never came up very much in the beginning of my time at FOI, but sadly, it's come up a lot since Sandy Hook happened in 2012. It starts with boards of education, then it goes to boards of finance, then it goes to boards of selectmen and councils. If you think about it, why would you talk about ways to keep people safe when the very people you're trying to keep them safe from could be sitting in the audience? Another one that's come up a lot in the last year or so is cybersecurity. We've had towns get hacked. Up in Plainfield end of last year, their whole system got shut down. They had no access. And again, they had to meet behind closed doors to talk about, first of all, how it happened, then how to prevent it from happening again. Again, the same logic would make sense. Why would you talk about it in a public forum when the hackers could be sitting in the audience? Number 4, conversation about a real estate transaction. You're on a board that's going to buy a piece of property or lease a piece of property or sell a piece of property. You wouldn't have to negotiate in public. Again, doing that might compromise the town's position, might put the town in a bad spot. Someone could say, okay, good, the town's offering here, we'll offer a little bit more and we'll get the land, and the town will be out of luck. You wouldn't have to do that in a public forum. And the 5th reason for an executive session is a little broader than the other 4. It allows you to talk about the contents of a document, that is otherwise exempt, that you're not going to share with anybody else. Is anybody here involved with any projects or anything where you put something out to bid, or you deal with RFPs or something like that? There's an exemption in the FOI Act that says you don't have to release the contents of a bid package until you've actually signed the contract. So you're a Board of Education, you put your transportation contract out to bid, contracts out to bid, the bids come in, you're allowed to withhold them until you sign the contract, so you could look them over, decide which contract you want to go to, and then come out and vote to do it. You wouldn't have to have that discussion in public either. You ask your attorney for a written legal opinion. Now you're the client, represented by the attorney-client, so the paper is covered by the attorney-client privilege. You wouldn't have to talk about it behind closed doors. You wouldn't have to talk about it in public. It's not advice that you would have to share with anybody. Those are just a couple of examples. Remember, folks, never vote behind closed doors. That's critical. Always make sure the vote is public and in the minutes. So in addition to executive session, another path that boards can go down, it's one of those that kind of makes, I wind up scratching my head because it's difficult to describe, but I read you the definition of a meeting. The sentence that follows that in the law says meeting does not include. Meeting does not include. There follows a list of things, many of which everybody in this room would say is a meeting. And again, this goes to the gentleman's point in the beginning. But the legislature said, that's fine. You can call it a meeting if you want, but for the purposes of freedom of information, it's not a meeting. And one of those is collective bargaining. Is anybody involved in any collective bargaining at any time? Collective bargaining strategy negotiation sessions, not meetings under FOI. Now, if you think about that, you're negotiating, let's suppose you're negotiating a big union contract. It's a massive part of your budget. You would think that that's something the public should be involved in, should be able to see. Legislature said no, collective bargaining, not a meeting. Executive level search committees. The police chief's going to retire. You put together a committee to look for a new chief. Law says that committee can operate outside of freedom of information. Here's one that kind of goes to the heart of the question that was asked before. You're allowed to have a chance meeting or social gathering. The wording is neither planned nor intended for the purpose of discussing matters relating to official business. So you like each other. District 4 wants to go out for dinner after the meeting. Well, it's too late. Maybe before the meeting you want to go out to dinner. I ask you, what else are you going to talk about? Are you not going to talk about town business? Let us not be naive. Let us be realistic. I'm supposed to stand up here and say, you should never, ever talk about board business outside of the meeting room. The reality is, folks, those conversations are going to happen. Here is my strongest advice. Do not dig into those deep deliberative debates that you should be having here, or at whatever board you sit on, or whatever subcommittee you're on. The world needs to understand that some of these conversations are going to take place. Technically, they shouldn't take place at all, but I urge you to remember that if you're out to dinner and you're having that, you forget where you are and you have that conversation, I guarantee you the wrong person sitting in the next booth and files a complaint that you've had an illegal meeting. Do not set your budget over the eggnog at the Christmas party. Be really smart about it. Understand what the law is intended to do. The question was asked about, we go to one board. It also allows members of Board A, all of them, to go to a meeting of Board B and not notice a meeting. Now, if they sit over in the corner and start doing board business, that's a different situation. But if they go to observe, or maybe even answer a question or two, I'm thinking in terms of the Board of Education going en masse to a Board of Finance meeting, and they want to answer a couple questions that the Board of Finance, that's fine. But they can't then go off and start making policy while the Board of Finance is talking about this Public Works budget. You know what I'm saying? Again, be smart about it. Be intelligent about it. This also goes beyond meeting in public. The definition of a meeting, whether in person or by means of electronic equipment. Electronic equipment was written 48 years ago for the powerful chairman, moderator, gets on the phone and says, I want you to do this, I want you to do that, you need to boom, 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 boom. You walk in, packed house, controversial issue, all in favor, all opposed, and then it's over. What happened to the debate? Well, they had the debate on the phone before the meeting took place. That is not proper. And today, it's a lot more than telephones, isn't it? We're talking about email and text and Twitter. And especially once the pandemic hit and we were all working from home, did we or did we not have incredible amount of conversation via some of those vehicles? I am not here to tell you to stop using them, but you need to understand that when you write an email that has to do with Darien business, it falls under a very large tent of something that's defined as a public record. Now, it may be a public record that you don't have to give out, it may be exempt, but it's a public record. So if somebody says, I want to see any and all emails between members of Board A about topic B, you would be obligated to produce them, and then somebody's looking at it and said, wait a minute, they brought this up, they debated it via email, they made their decision via email, they did this meeting outside of the public view. I get a lot of questions from people who say, wait, we can't get anything done. Well, remember, you lose some of the ability to do things quickly when you're in the public sector. That's just the way the law is, and for the good of democracy, it works better that way. But understand, you want to avoid having those kinds of conversations that you should be having at the meeting table. The chairman sends out something that says, I feel really strongly about this. I want everybody to read this, and as a matter of fact, I'm bringing this to the full board, and we're going to talk about it. Well, that's fine. Send it to everybody. But then you write back and say, that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. And then you write back and you say, gee, I really like that idea. And then you say, I'm not crazy about it, but and the next thing you know, you're debating it via email. Stop that conversation. That will keep you out of a potential problem when it comes to freedom of information. The other thing with meetings that we should talk about is minutes. Anybody here responsible for minutes? Oh, several poor unfortunate souls. I feel your pain. I did the Freedom of Information Commission meeting minutes for years. Minutes need not be the recreation of War and Peace. They are not meant to be this massive long treatise, and everybody says this, and he said that, and she said that. Technically, the only requirement for meeting minutes is a record of the votes. That's technically the only requirement. Now, you want more than that. Clearly, you're creating the historical record for your town. But how much more, remember, is in the hands of the minutes taker, or the board at the very least. So somebody stands up at a meeting, and again, I know this is Darien, it doesn't happen. I want every word of this in the minutes, and I demand that everything be in the minutes, and blah, blah, blah. And it's not required. You can if you want to, but it's not required. Somebody submits a 5-page, treatise. They want every word in the minutes. Not required. It's a public record once it crosses the threshold, but it's not required. How much of that you put in your minutes is up to you. The law clearly requires minutes to be submitted within 7 days. The question that comes up all the time is, well, wait a minute, we don't meet again? Doesn't matter. The law is written, 7 days, the minutes are in. You want to vote on them 2 weeks hence, 3 weeks hence, doesn't matter. Those become the minutes. If you're going to make any changes, any corrections to this set of minutes, they're reflected in that set of minutes. That's the way the law is structured. Don't shoot the messenger. A lot of people say, wait a minute, but that's just the way they wrote it. 7 days, no ifs, ands, or buts. I'm trying to think if there's anything else about meetings, but I want to just give you a couple minutes about records. Does anybody have any questions about meetings that we haven't touched on? Yes, ma'am.
Do I have to come up there? Just stay.
You could just stay for, yeah.
In terms of things that are not considered meetings, is a caucus a meeting?
Okay, the caucus is one of those things that falls under that meeting does not include. A caucus allows members of the same board and the same party to have a conversation. Same board, same party, so caucus is not a meeting.
Can you clarify, though, for this body is unaffiliated as
Right.
far as we're concerned? So just talk about how it would...
And by the way, one of these times, I'm going to come down here and you can give me a lesson on RTMs. Our town meetings have, about half this many people, and it's the whole town. So but if you are caucusing, I've had conversations with Wayne Fox about this. This is a little bit one of those, I'm not sure, no one's ever challenged it, I'm not sure how it goes, but it seems to me because you are unaffiliated, if your districts are caucusing to elect members and things like that, I would think, based on what I've read, that those are not meetings. But understand that hasn't been adjudicated. Somebody could challenge that and the commission could disagree with me. Again, things get interpreted and changed all the time, but as I stand here today, that would be what I thought.
Does it matter what the district talks about? Say they talk about town business.
I would think that once they start morphing into town business, they might want to be careful about that. If they're going to have a discussion about setting policy or something like that, they might want to stop and think, you know what, at this point, maybe we better make that a meeting. Yes, sir?
Sort of related to my question before, so if I understood what you were saying, if 8 of us, which would normally be a quorum for our committee, are at the same place, and we're there to hear what the people up front are saying, it's not a meeting for us.
Correct. Absolutely correct.
Until
Yes,
we
ma'am.
start talking about it.
Unless you go off and start having a major discussion about what you're going to do next, something else, something not related to what you went to hear.
Well, I guess that is the question. I mean, again, we're there independently,
Right.
and we're maybe all sitting together and we then start talking. And then if it is a meeting, which obviously we didn't notice, well,
Well, my suggestion would be to go back to what I said about, being careful how deep you go into the discussion. If you feel, use your common sense. If you feel that it's getting you to something that you should be debating, cut the conversation off and talk about the weather and bring it up at the next meeting.
but I guess if we don't, what's the penalty? So let's say,
We bring people out and shoot them at sunrise. No. If somebody files a complaint, the most stringent penalty in a meeting situation is that meeting is declared null and void. And what you've done would be reversed and you'd have to go back and do it again. The FOI Commission can also levy civil penalties. Now listen, if you're in a situation where it's sort of an accident, which happens a lot, folks, by the way, most of us are volunteers where we sit on a board. We don't intentionally do this stuff. The commission tends not to be punitive. They'll say, please don't do it again. But if you're hauled up before the FOI Commission 15 times for illegal meetings, they'll probably slap you with a penalty. It's a civil penalty of up to $1,000. Yes, sir.
Similar situation. We have, in my particular case, 7 people show up to listen to the Board of Ed discuss their budget.
Okay.
Only 2 of us exchange comments. Not with the rest of the committee, just the 2 of us. To me, that's not discussing.
Then you're probably okay, because that's less than a quorum.
I just wanted to
Yeah.
make sure. It wasn't that the 7 of us
Right.
huddled together and
Right. Now,
did a plan.
Unless you're a subgroup.
unless you're the formal budget subcommittee, the 2 of you, unless you form the subcommittee, but otherwise, no, you're fine.
Have a separate
Right.
meeting. That's one of the reasons I took it away.
Okay. Yes, ma'am.
You spoke quickly about minutes, and if we have minutes in 7 days that are listed, and then on our next meeting, we discover that something was right wrong in the minutes, can we go back and edit those minutes, or do we write it up in the new minutes that the change needs to be made?
You would write it up in the new set of minutes that the previous minutes need a correction.
Can you talk about the vote, the timing for votes being posted after a meeting?
The record, there needs to be a record of the votes available in 48 hours. Now, that doesn't necessarily have to be a formal posted document, but it's got to be available, either in your office, the clerk's office, or something like that. So after 48 hours, I can come in and find out how the vote went 2 days previously. Yes, ma'am.
I still have a question about the caucus meeting differentiation. If, with the regulation we have on minority representation on boards and commissions, if everybody from one party gets together, and it includes no one from the other party, and there's a majority, is that a meeting, a caucus?
Remember what I said about getting everybody to vote yes back to the legislature? That's a giant loophole in the concept of an open government, but remember that they had to twist a lot of arms. We believe that caucus provision, you just described it correctly, by the way, to answer your question. It doesn't mean that it's a meeting, even if it's a majority of the group. It's counterintuitive when you think about, wait a minute, so they can all get together, they can set everything up, and nobody can do anything about it? The answer is technically yes. That would be
What's the purpose of FOI?
well, because people don't caucus. The intent is not to have it be political, that they do things together, so.
I have a question about, we've been warned on emails. Oh, sorry, on emails that are emails amongst our committees. You can't reply to all, because that would constitute a meeting?
No, you can certainly reply to all, thank you, or we can look at it or something like that. The reply to all problem comes in when I was talking about the chairman sends somebody out and people start commenting on it and you start having a conversation. You don't want to initiate a conversation. So reply to all can be dangerous. It's not forbidden, but it can be really dangerous. You want to be careful what you're replying to all.
So you can't ask a question or something that would
No,
instigate a conversation?
exactly. That's where I would hold the line on the reply to all. But if somebody sends something out and you want to ask that person directly, understanding that you're creating a public record in that email exchange, that would not be a meetings issue. So just a little bit about public records, because again, I'm mindful of the fact that you have other work to do tonight. The bottom line with public records is that everything that you create, that you read, that you use, that you study in the conduct of town business becomes by definition a public record. Now, there are numerous exemptions and exceptions and things like that. It takes way too long to go over them. But I want you to think in terms of this. If you don't want to see it on the front page of the Advocate or on the front page of the Hartford Courant or the whatever paper, I don't even know what paper comes around here anymore, don't send it. That's the short version. Think in terms of, okay, I'm creating a public record here. I want to be smart about it. I took a phone call a couple months ago from a woman. She said, hi, my name is Sean. I said, hi, Sean, how are you? She said, good. She said, I'm calling you from Georgia. Georgia? Who's calling Connecticut FOI from Georgia? She says, yeah, my husband's an out-of-state contractor, and he did a project in Connecticut last summer. And I think he had an affair with a state worker. Why is she calling me? It wasn't me. She wants to see that state worker's emails, and she wants to see that state worker's phone records. And I'm thinking, if the email says, meet me at the construction trailer at 6 o'clock, we will review the blueprints for the project, and then, ... That's a public record. She says, good, it'll help me with my divorce. So you know, the message, you know, we use email so much, and we tell jokes, and we do things like, and just think if it's connected somehow to the work that you do here, the good work you do for your town, your community. You just don't want to get sucked into that, to have a situation. You just want to be smart about the extent to which you create records. Yes?
Is there an expiration to being able to request records?
No.
Okay.
There's no expiration. Now, there are retention laws in Connecticut totally separate from freedom of information. Krista can probably help you with them if you have something like things you don't have to keep. My advice is always, and I'm horrible at this, by the way. I don't do what do what I say, not what I do. Don't save some stuff. Get rid of it. I told you I was on a board. I had one board member from town who would send me board-related, some of them sensitive issue questions at the Freedom of Information Commission. What are you doing? You know? And so, and again, if I missed one and someone wanted to see, you get the whole thing, it becomes, so you can clean them out. And by the way, if you have a record situation, first of all, just a couple little things. If you ever get a request for records, I don't know how you're structured, where the request goes or who handles it, but always make sure that there's a response to that request in 4 business days. If you don't respond in 4 business days, the law says that you have denied that person access and they can file one of those complaints. That's number 1. Number 2 is, remember, you don't have to create a record that doesn't exist. A lot of times people will ask you for a record, you just flat out don't have it. And to that end, you don't have to do research either. And another little tidbit is that sometimes people say, I want it and I want it now, I need it now. Well, they may need it now, but nothing in the law requires immediate access. The law talks about providing access to records in prompt fashion. And prompt is kind of open-ended. It means without undue delay, without unnecessary delay. So those are records that, you know, you be smart about it, understand that access is important, but not at the expense of everything else you have to do. Yes, ma'am.
And am I correct in my understanding that we're not, if the person or the entity is being asked
There's a request, if it's a request and it's a paper record, it's 50 cents a page. Now again, remember, the law is 48 years old, and to get this law changed, I like to say, is a little bit like mating elephants. It takes a while. And so there's no fee for electronic records yet, but I'm sure that's coming down the road. I'm watching the clock. I want to make sure you have time to do the rest of your work. Is there anything else that I didn't touch on that you wanted to ask about? Anything at all? Yes, sir.
Could you comment on the use of the .gov email address? If a person is receiving business correspondence at the Darien.gov, and there's some trouble, there's some hearing or request, does the state have the ability to secure the rest of your computer in addition to the .gov information?
I've been there 22 years, and we have never ordered any kind of an audit or anything like that. We have never ordered an audit or anything like that. We leave it to the person who has the records to produce them. We don't seize computers or things like that, if that's what you're talking about. But if you've got a record on there and someone wants it and you're refusing to give it up, or the town's refusing to give it up, we could order the release of that, and then it would go forward from there. But we wouldn't actually seize the record. Okay? The only time I've ever seen that happen was on a federal level and involved John Rowland back when things were not going so well for him back there. But that was not us. We didn't order that. What else? Any other questions? Any other thoughts? Okay, ladies and gentlemen, thank you.
Tom, thank you very much. You're welcome. Did everybody have fun? Learn a little something, huh? All right. That's good. Well, to return to the mundane, let's talk about the fire truck. $825,000, and to lead off the excitement, Jack Davis from the Finance and Budget Committee. Thank you so much. Nice job. Good to see you.
This goes a lot quicker if I can actually read what I wrote. Sorry. I'm Jack Davis, District 3, Chair of the RTM Finance and Budget Committee. I had it last, not first. I move Resolution 23-6, appropriating $825,415 for the purchase of a fire engine and authorizing the issuance of bonds and notes in the amount of $825,415 to meet said appropriation. Do I have a second? Second. Tom Moore. Without objection, I waive the reading of the resolution. The Norotan Heights Fire Department is requesting the approval of a fire engine. Total amount with bond expenses is $825,415. The estimated annual cost for the bond is $54,000. That being said, the actual timing of the bond for fire equipment is when payments are made, typically 25% upon order and 75% upon delivery, which can be as much as 24 to 30 months later. we've seen expanded times under the pandemic. In this case, payments are going to be made upon the completion of stages, so approximately 50% upon the completion of the chassis and other payments between then and the final delivery. So we may not be issuing this bond for over a year. The RTM Public Health and Safety Committee, with Mac Patrick chair, will provide the detail of the fire engine being approved. I do want to mention that this engine was covered during last year's tour of the fire departments, recorded by Channel 79. It's a good thing to watch. Last thing, the town emergency management study mentioned that the town's fire equipment should be replaced if older than 25 years and no longer meeting standard fire equipment safety requirements. This engine was specifically noted in the report, and it meets both of those qualifications. The RTM Finance and Budget Committee voted unanimously to approve this purchase and the authorization of bonds and notes to meet said appropriation and recommendation. The committee did have one abstention, as the son of one of the committee's members belongs to the Norotan Heights Fire Department. After the committee discussion and vote, that member stated they were in favor of the purchase, so it didn't interfere with our discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Jack. Speaking on behalf of Public Health and Safety, Mac Patrick.
Thanks, sir. Good evening. I'm Mac Patrick, Chair of Public Health and Safety. Our committee met jointly with the Finance and Budget Committee virtually on Wednesday, February 15th, 2023, with a quorum present to discuss Resolution 23-6. Norotan Fire Chief Zach McEwen and First Assistant Justin Plank gave an overview of the current Engine 23 and noted it would not be fiscally responsible to spend over $300,000 on a 33-year-old apparatus. They noted the Emergency Services Analyst's final report dated January 7th, 2023, which follows the National Fire Protection Association recommendation to replace vehicles after 25 years. The new truck will provide the volunteers with current safety standards of 3-point seat belts, anti-roll, ABS, and airbags. In addition, the new engine will have additional hose capacity for the increased dwelling size in Darayen's commercial districts. Engine 23 is considered the Norotan Heights Fire Department's primary engine for any alarm in a dwelling. Questions were asked about trade-in value, and Chief McEwen noted trade-ins typically don't happen for the same reason why the 33-year-old truck cannot reasonably be retrofitted. It has a scrap value under $2,000, but parts could be sold to collectors, and there are instances where whole vehicles are sold to collectors. I mean, who here wouldn't want to have their own fire truck? The Public Health and Safety Committee voted unanimously with one abstention, and that's me because my firm, Morgan Stanley, doesn't want me to vote on municipal bond issues. But we voted unanimously to purchase and bond the new Engine 23 and ask that the full RTM do the same. Thank you.
Thanks, Mac. Are there any other committees that wish to report? Any comments from town officials? Anything from the RTM body? Any electors of the town wish to speak? Then ready to vote? All those in favor, please rise. Opposed? Abstentions? I see none. Next item on the agenda is accept a gift of $25,000 from the Darien Foundation for the preparation of a bid package for Weed Beach Meadow and Trail Project. Patty's here, great. Speaking on behalf of the Park and Recreation Committee, Patty Baumgartner.
Seth, do you want me to wait till everybody comes through?
No, go ahead.
To start?
Let's not...
Okay, kick it in. Hi, my name is Patty Baumgartner. I'm Vice Chair of the RTM Parks and Recreation Committee. I move Resolution 23-3 to authorize the acceptance of a gift from the Darien Foundation in the amount of $25,000 and appropriate said amount for the Weed Beach Meadow and Trail construction bid project. Do I have a second? Second. Kim Kiner? It's a second. So I'm reading this on behalf of my chair, but I just want to qualify one thing. This is strictly for the acceptance of a $25,000 gift from the Darien Foundation. So you're going to hear some detail about the Weed Beach Meadow and Trail project, and then you'll hear me read what she says, that it doesn't obligate us to do the project down the line. So I just want to be really clear. This is just the acceptance of a $25,000 gift from the Darien Foundation. In their fiscal year 24 capital improvement request, the Parks and Rec Commission requested $1 million for the construction of the Weed Beach Meadow and Trail project, as well as $25,000 to put together a bid package for the project. The property has remained unusable since the town purchased Fort Short Lane in 2014, which is nearly a decade ago, for $1,750,000. The town administrator did not bring forward to the Board of Selectmen the budget requests for our upcoming fiscal because any request of $1 million or higher would need to come to the selectmen outside of this budget process. And that's because it's customary for projects over $1 million to require a building committee. A Weed Beach Meadow and Trail project has been under consideration by the Parks and Rec Commission for several years. Improvements would go to expand the use of the property and the beach and make it much more usable and accessible to the public. In addition to extending the gift of the $25,000 for the bid package, the Darien Foundation has approved a generous grant for up to $350,000 towards the Weed Beach Meadow and Trail project. This grant is pending various future town approvals. When appropriate, the $350,000 grant will be brought to the Board of Selectmen for approval. The bid package for the Weed Beach Meadow and Trail project was supported by the town administrator, but was removed from the budget when a grant of $25,000 from the Darien Foundation for the bid package was offered. Again, very generous. The bid package would prepare all construction documents and permits necessary to go out to bid for the lowest project costs, ultimately determining whether total project costs would remain within the amount that Weston and Sampson previously estimated. Accepting the $25,000 bid from the Darien Foundation in no way obligates the town, no matter what the total project costs, to move forward with the project. Acceptance simply allows the bid process to give an up-to-date estimate of what the project would cost. The Parks and Rec Commission, the Board of Selectmen, and the Board of Finance have approved acceptance of this bid package funding from the Darien Foundation. Thank you, Darien Foundation, for your support. The RTM Parks and Rec Committee met on February 16, 2023, with 11 of 14 members present and voted unanimously to approve the acceptance of the $25,000 gift from the Darien Foundation and the appropriation of said amount for a bid package for the Weed Beach Meadow and Trail project. We hope the RTM will support this generous gift. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Patty. Speaking on behalf of the Finance and Budget Committee, Jack Davis.
I'm Jack Davis, District 3, Chair of the RTM Finance and Budget Committee. Thank you, Adele, for the detailed report and for Patty delivering it. I will only amplify that the acceptance of this gift does not commit the town or the RTM to move forward with the Weed Beach Meadow and Trail project. It is meant solely to determine the cost of said project should the town, the Board of Finance, and the RTM wish to proceed. We'd like to thank the foundation for their gift. The RTM Finance and Budget Committee voted unanimously with the understanding that approval of this gift is intended solely to determine the potential cost of said project and recommends the same to the full RTM. Thank you.
Thank you, Jack. Are there any other committees that wish to report? Any remarks from town officials? Any comments from the body? Any comments from electors of the town? Ready to vote? Those in favor, please rise. Item 23-6 on the fire truck, passed 73 in favor, no opposed, 2 abstentions. No votes, please. Abstentions? Okay. The next item on the agenda is accept and appropriation of gift of $20,000 from the Dortelman family for restoration of Cherry Lawn Park gazebo. And again, speaking on behalf of the Park and Recreation Committee, Patty Baumgartner.
Hi, I'm Patty Baumgartner, again, Vice Chair of the RTM Parks and Rec Committee. I move Resolution 23-4, authorizing the acceptance of a gift in the amount of $20,000 and the appropriation of said amount to the town for the repair and restoration of the Cherry Lawn gazebo. Do I have a second? Okay. Can you find it? So this is a good day when we're just accepting money, I think. Okay, again, I'm reading this on behalf of Adele, my chair. Cherry Lawn Park was the site of Cherry Lawn School from 1920 to 1972. The town of Darien bought the property when the school closed. Historical data mentions a school gazebo, and a gazebo is part of a bronze plaque that's at the park, which remembers the school. However, the gazebo by the pond in Cherry Lawn was built as a result of a donation gift by the Girl Scouts. They raised $12,000 through a recycling of bottles and cans campaign for the gazebo, and were recognized, this is years ago, decades ago, and were recognized as the organization of the year by the Chamber of Commerce in the early 1980s. The gazebo was built in the Victorian style, 20 feet octagonal, with a bell tower and 7 perimeter benches. In recent years, the Parks and Rec Commission has been considering whether to replace or renovate the structure due to its deteriorating condition. Last August, the Commission decided it was important to save the gazebo due to the historical significance of the structure. The town had approved $15,000 in the 2021 capital improvement budgets to replace the roof of the gazebo. So once that decision was made to renovate, the roof replacement was bid out and the work was done in December 2022. If you haven't been down to Cherry Lawn, by the way, to see it, it's beautiful, especially in the snow. It was so pretty the other day. The Dortelman family has kindly offered to donate $20,000 to honor their father, Bill Dortelman, husband and father, who died in 2020. Cherry Lawn was the family's neighborhood recreation area, and the four siblings have many fond memories of Cherry Lawn, and particularly of being taught to skate on the pond by their dad. Restoring the gazebo and putting a plaque on it in his memory seems a fitting way to remember him. Renovation of the structure has now been bid out with a low bid of $17,500, which includes replacing the handicap ramp and the rails and some of the rotten boards. And it leaves, that $20,000 leaves sufficient amount for remaining for the plaque. Parks and Rec staff will finish the restoration by power washing and painting the structure. Thank you very much to the Dortelman family for your generous gift and for your patience as we worked through this process. The Parks and Recreation Commission, the Board of Selectmen, and the Board of Finance have approved the acceptance of the $20,000 gift by the Dortelman family. On February 16, 2023, the RTM Parks and Recreation Committee, with 11 of 14 members present, voted unanimously to accept the gift and appropriate the funds to renovate the gazebo at Cherry Lawn, and we hope the RTM will do the same. Many thanks.
Thank you, Patty. Speaking on behalf of the Finance and Budget Committee, Jack Davis, Chair.
I'm Jack Davis, District 3, RTM Budget and Finance and Budget Committee Chair. Thank you, Adele and Patty, for the detailed report. It makes mine real short. The committee reviewed the gift and wishes to thank the Dortelman family for this wonderful gift honoring their late father. The initial cost of $17,500 is been put out for bid, so it's a pretty firm number. And the only outstanding amount is the cost of the plaque, which we believe should be done with the remaining $2,500. The RTM Finance and Budget Committee met and unanimously approved this gift resolution and recommends the same to the full RTM. Thank you.
Thank you, Jack. Other committees wish to report? Any remarks from town officials? Any comments from the RTM body? Anything from electors of the town? We seem ready to vote. All those in favor, please rise. Item 23-3 passed 72 in favor, no opposed, 2 abstentions. No votes, please. Abstentions. Okay, next item on the agenda is approve a special appropriation for a workers' compensation voluntary agreement between a Darien police officer and the town. Speaking on behalf of the Finance and Budget Committee, Jack Davis.
I'm Jack Davis, District 3, Chair of the RTM Finance and Budget Committee. I move Resolution 23-5, approval of a special appropriation for a workers' compensation volunteer agreement between a Darien police officer and the town of Darien. Do I hear a second? Jim Cameron. If there's no objection, I waive the reading of the resolution. According to Connecticut law, emergency management employees hired before July 1st, 1996, any heart or hypertension impairment was presumed to be an occupational illness. On November 30th, 2022, the Workmen' Compensation Commission approved a voluntary agreement between a Darien police officer and the town where the officer was given an impairment rating of 27.5% regarding their heart. The settlement was $142,714. The rating was computed, the amount was computed by 143 weeks at $998 per week, beginning on March 1st, 2019. Due to the fact that this is a voluntary agreement was not improved until November 30th, 2022, well beyond the 143 weeks from May 1st, 2019, the benefit agreed to must be paid in full. The RTM is not voting to agree with the settlement. That's already been done. The RTM is voting to approve a special appropriation to pay the settlement. That is what is before us tonight. As an aside, the law has been changed, and the town has hired a noted company that's known for its workmen's compensation knowledge and competencies for determining future compensation settlements. The RTM Finance and Budget Committee met and unanimously approved the special appropriation to pay this settlement from the general fund and recommends the same to the full RTM. Thank you.
Thank you, Jack. Are there other committees which wish to report? Any remarks from town officials? Anything from the RTM body? Comments from electors of the town? Appears we're ready to vote. All in favor, please rise. Item 23-4, the gazebo, passed 73 in favor, no opposed, 1 abstention. Everybody has to wait till we get the count. Need the count.
Did you call for the noes or the abstentions?
Noes? Abstentions? Looked like I had everybody up. Thanks, Clara.
We did have.
72 yes, 0 no, 2 abstentions.
Okay, the settlement, 23-5, passed 72 in favor, no opposed, 2 abstentions. I'll accept a motion to adjourn. Oh, I see so many. All in favor, please rise.